Yeah, what's he going to say about the third order of consciousness? I don't really know. I'll have to wait and see. I've been preparing for this talk, but sometimes I prepare a talk and write a full set of notes and then something else emerges. So I don't know what's going to happen. But I wanted to start by talking about our relationship, which is the important thing about our community, our relationship, and how we're all on a quest. Each one of us individually is on a quest, but we have come together somehow into relationship with each other, and now we're questing in cooperation. I like that word quest, because it's like question. And when you're on a quest, you're looking for something, you're seeking something. And sometimes you formulate a question, and that motivates you to seek, and seek more penetratively than before. In Saraha's workshop yesterday, he asked us to pair up, and in each pair, one formulated a key question, an open question, and then holds that question in the context of their whole experience in their whole life. And they don't formulate the question to find an answer in words. They formulate the question as a key question to unlock something. To unlock something like unlocking an unknowing. In order to discover and understand more deeply, you have to first let go of what you already know. So somehow you have to have something that will unlock your unknowing. And then there's room for a new knowing to arise. So how did we find our way into this relationship? Each one of us has a story. And Manju Vajra was telling something of his story, but each one of us has a different story. I think of it as a bit like streams trickling down the hillside and then finding their way into a river, and then going along in the river, but somehow this is where the metaphor breaks down, because it's not as if those streams just merge into one conglomerate mass. Somehow the streams flow into the river and then keep their individuality. This is what spiritual community is. Each one of us is individual. And right now, each one of you has a unique stream of thoughts and feelings and emotions and sensations going on. It's different from every one of us. And yet, we are all attending to the same thing together. And we're all choosing to do that freely. Not because anybody is making us do it, not because we're trying to conform to something, but because we choose to do that. And it was that approach to a sort of cooperative questing that is what the order is. And that's what we have been drawn to. Each of us started out on our own, breaking away from something mundane and ordinary and increasingly unsatisfactory, until we just couldn't bear it anymore. And we somehow extricated ourselves and found our way into this relationship so that we could continue to look for a better way of being, a better way of living. And now we're on this cooperative quest. And it consists of, I looked it up, 2,758 men and women all over the world in 5 continents. And right now, at this moment, all of those people are on a quest, and they're all in relationship, questing together. And when somebody discovers something new, they tell the others. That's what Shabda's about, isn't it? And all of the other modes of communication between us, including order weekends. So yesterday, Sarahat was sharing something he discovered because he was onto something. He knew he was onto something, and it was working for him, and he wanted to share it with his friends. And that's how the order works. I had a bit of a breakthrough in mindfulness of breathing earlier this year. I've been doing it for 48 years. I discovered a new way of doing it after all this time. I'm 69. I'm still discovering. And I've shared it with a couple of people this weekend. So that's what we do, isn't it? You find something new that works for you and you want to share it. So it's a kind of cooperative happening, this order. And all of us have been drawn to take an interest in Bhante Sangharakshita and his quest, get interested in his quest. And he was on a quest since boyhood. And then when he was 16, he discovered that his quest was a Buddhist quest. And he says, always had been. And when he discovered that, it drew him into an intensive study of the Buddha's quest, because, of course, the Buddha was on a quest before him. So we're all questing, and we're taking interest in Bhante's quest, who's taking interest in the Buddha's quest, and all of us are just human beings looking for a better way to be. So what did the Buddha teach? I'm going to quote something you'll know very well, but it's good to hear it again. Many people, out of fear, flee for refuge to sacred hills, woods, groves, trees, and shrines. In reality, this is not a safe refuge. In reality, this is not the best refuge. Fleeing to such a refuge, one is not released from all suffering. One who goes for refuge to the enlightened one, to the truth, and to the spiritual community, and who sees with perfect wisdom the 4 Aryan truths, namely suffering, the origin of suffering, the passing beyond suffering, and the Aryan Eightfold Way leading to the pacification of suffering. For such a one, this is a safe refuge. This is the best refuge. Having gone to such a refuge, one is released from all suffering. But Bhante used to ask, but what did he mean by that? He was always asking that question. What was the Buddha getting at? Why did he teach that way? What did he mean by refuge? And he went on pondering and questing and wondering for years and years and years, studying all the different Buddhist schools. What do all these people have in common, who all call themselves Buddhists? What is it essentially that they all have in common? And according to his own account, at the age of 40, in 1966, he realized that what they all have in common is going for refuge. And that lies at the heart of their quest. And that's what brings about the transformation of consciousness in each practitioner. And 2 years later, in 1968, he founded the order based on that understanding which he passed on to his followers, his disciples. So I'm going to read a passage from his own account in The History of My Going for Refuge. The founding of the Western Buddhist order was not only an important stage in the process whereby the significance and value of going for refuge became clear to me, it also marked the beginning of a new phase in that process. Though I had realized that going for refuge was a central act of the Buddhist life and that it meant organizing one's whole existence around the three jewels, that realization had so far found expression only in my personal life and in my writings and lectures, and even then only to a very limited extent. But now, the situation was entirely changed. The 12 people who made up the Western Buddhist order had taken the 3 refuges and 10 precepts from me and had been ordained as upasikas and as upasikas by me, and their understanding of the meaning of going for refuge coincided with mine, at least partly. Like one lamp lighting a dozen others, I had been able to share with them my realization of the absolute centrality of the act of going for refuge. And henceforth that realization would find expression not in my life only, but also in theirs. Not that the realization in question was something fixed and final. It could continue to grow and develop and find an expression in 100 ways as yet unthought of. Later on, just after that, there's another passage when he talks about how his understanding of going for refuge was deepening through witnessing how the going for refuge was being lived out by this wide variety of different men and women. And people were living out the going for refuge in quite a different way from the way he was living it out. And yet he could see that it was an authentic, effective going for refuge, just their way of doing it. And that deepened his understanding of essentially what going for refuge was. Well, this is the key question with which we all entered the order. And not just those 12 order members back in 1968, but, when we were training for ordination, this question is like, what is going for refuge and how do I deepen my going for refuge was the key question that we all had. I've heard a story that there was quite an experienced Zen teacher visiting Padmaloka one time, and he was shown around the center and somebody like Padmavajra explained to him what the ordination training consisted in. And then, I don't know, they were having a cup of tea together and he was trying to make sense of it all. And he says, I know, your central koan is what is going for refuge. That's your koan. And we have koans too, so I get that. Now, the interesting thing about the koan with which you enter the order, I remember going up to Suvajra a few days after he ordained me and going, so now I'm doing it, effectively going for refuge. So what's changed from before when I wasn't effectively? Can you try and explain it to me, Suvajra? And he had to go, but of course I still didn't quite get it. And he's just over there. I remember that conversation outside your hut in the sunshine at Kikiloka 34 years ago. And the thing is that a question like that should not be answered in words. It should be an open question that you hold open in the context of your life. And it motivates you to wonder and discover. And it's a question that you can only respond to an open question like that by living your life, not by trying to figure it out in words. You live it out. You remember there's that quotation from Rilke letters to a young poet. I would like to beg you, dear sir, as well as I can, to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart, and to try and love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday, far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. That's so relevant to what we're doing, and so relevant to what Saraha was getting at yesterday, isn't it? You just hold the question without trying to answer it, and the question helps you to live your way into a better way, a new way of being. And somehow by living into a new way of being, you're getting closer to what the question is pointing to, and you still haven't answered it. And the question, what is going for refuge is, how can I go for refuge in my life? And how can I go for refuge more effectively, more and more and more effectively? So it's a koan that's not just an abstract thing, it's a personal koan for each one of us. When Bhante gave us the Sangha practice of meeting in chapters, he described this Sangha practice as a spiritual workshop whose explicit purpose was to refresh the going for refuge, to clarify the going for refuge, to deepen the going for refuge of each and every member of the chapter. When he was asked to explain what he meant by spiritual workshop, that's how he explained it. This was to be a workshop in which chapter members helped each other to clarify their understanding and deepen their Dharma practice. Yesterday, Saraha showed us another kind of workshop, which was like a really effective chapter meeting, but in pairs, one-to-one, where one person explores a key question of their own choosing, while the other listens deeply and attentively, or occasionally helps by asking something. Chapter meetings usually involve 4 to 10 order members, according to Bhante, but can sometimes be just as effective as that workshop, though not always, as we all know. As we all know, chapters sometimes don't feel very effective at all. A chapter meeting can be quite a dull, boring, or frustrating experience. But we all know what it feels like when a chapter really works well. When somehow we're all in rapport with one another, and somehow what we are trying to discover is a shared activity. And in that shared activity, you can somehow forget yourself. And you're just with your brothers, kind of questing together. And in that shared rapport, I had an experience of this a few weeks ago in a chapter meeting. It was actually an online chapter meeting, would you believe? Actually, from what I can hear, most chapters are online these days. And somehow we have to make the online medium work, because for most chapters, this is the medium they have. And I want to celebrate that it can work. That time we were in this chapter meeting somehow together. We were doing it online. I was down in Norwich. Vanavasin was way up there in the Highlands, hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And yet somehow we were together. And there was a kind of rapport between us which just flowed. We were all sort of held in this mysterious flowing rapport. And even when we stopped speaking in the silence, it was still holding us somehow. And we all kind of commented on how wonderful it was without really understanding it. And of course, you never really know, is that the third order of consciousness or not? You can't tell, can you? Because Bhante wisely never defined it in such a way that you could really know for certain that you were experiencing it or not. But I think that we can get too hung up on trying to establish for certain what you have experienced. It's a bit of a side issue, really. What Bhante was trying to invite us and attract us to do was to set up the conditions for something really special to arise. And he had to go in his own groping words to describe that, because he'd had the experience and he wanted us to have it too. So what he concentrated on was setting up the conditions. He gave us this Sangha practice of chapter practice, and he encouraged us to figure out how to do it really well. And we're still trying. About 50 years later, we're still trying. And it's a bit like, it's one of these collective quests. You know, we're all trying to meditate. We're all trying to figure out how to have an effective chapter meeting. Among the regional order conveners, we've been discussing how we can help. Especially how we can help chapters that seem to have got a bit stuck and are no longer so effective as they once were, to be really vibrant and effective spiritual workshops for everybody in them. We're planning to help by especially supporting the chapter conveners in their role. Chapter conveners have gone out of fashion a bit in the movement. We're hoping that we can bring them back in. And I'll be writing a new guide to chapter convening later this month. A chapter convener is someone who takes on to clarify their own understanding of chapter practice and then remind their chapter of what it's for. Years ago, Subhuti gave a series of talks for chapter conveners in India, which were later compiled into what came to be called the Source Book for Chapter Conveners. And I want to read you a short extract. So this is Subhuti talking to chapter conveners in India. The whole endeavour of a chapter is self-transcendence. Members of a chapter try to achieve ekkachitta, the state of having many bodies but one mind, or in different terminology, to achieve the mysterious harmony with other people that Bhante has called the third order of consciousness. He has also used the Russian word sobornosht, which is the quality of remaining completely yourself at the same time as being completely united with others. It means being as concerned for others as selves as you are for yourself as self. It's one of those little passages that is really useful for a chapter to all study together and try and figure out what it means as a way of inspiring them to live that out in their chapter and be more effective. The whole endeavour of a chapter is self-transcendence. Maybe the whole endeavour of all Dharma practices is self-transcendence. Maybe that's the whole point of all of this. So that we can sort of extricate ourselves from being so caught up in self, which feels so constricting, confining. When you're preoccupied with me, what about me? What's going to become of me? That obsession that we can have that keeps us kind of locked into an isolated, separate state. I think that's what the Buddha was trying to do, to free us from that imprisonment of being locked into selfishness. In so many ways, greed, selfish, petty hatreds, self-centered delusions, conceit, distraction, envy, all of that, me. Conditioned existence is intrinsically insecure. We're all embodied in impermanent bodies that are aging and failing all the time and will one day die. And we can't hold on to anything. Sooner or later, we won't have anything to hold on to anything with. Not even our minds. Our minds will go too. And for some of us, they're already going. Which is such a humbling thing as you get old. You can't remember people's names. Or the words for things. It's a sort of slow death of the mind. But that's inevitable. And yet it's... If I hadn't been practicing the Dharma all my life, I would get anxious about it. And a lot of old people do get anxious about it. They get anxious when their body falls apart and their mind starts falling apart and everything is kind of disintegrating. And that's horrible and it's fearful. But it's only horrible and fearful because they're reacting to it in that very self-referential way. That's what makes it horrible and fearful. They don't have to do that. Kamalashila didn't do it that way. When he discovered that he was going to die, he didn't react to it with fear and horror, did he? He said, I'm looking forward to the great day. I'm preparing for it. I think he was kind of curious about, wow, what would it be like? I've never died before. What's it going to be like? So this was Kamalashila after 50 years of Dharma practice. That's the difference it makes. So he was responding to insecure conditioned existence, not with anxiety and horror, but with self-transcending Dharma practice, as he had been doing for several decades. So the whole shift that the Buddha is encouraging us, inviting us to bring about, is a shift from reacting to conditioned existence in this way, of distraction and anxiety and aversion and obsessive craving, which just perpetuates the states of samsara, which is cramped and horrible and unfulfilling and into something spacious and peaceful and fulfilling and delightful. And he's showing us all these self-transcending practices to move from the cramped, horrible, unfulfilling way of being into the spacious, peaceful, fulfilling way of being. Generosity is like that. Kindness is like that. Honesty is like that. Mindfulness is like that. Metta is like that. Sangha practices are all like that. Chapter practices like that. Puja is like that. Can you think of any Dharma practice that is not inviting you to step away from the horrible, cramped way of being into the spacious, peaceful, fulfilling way of being? So this is the shift. This is the movement. It's like recoiling from this and going to that as a safe place, as a place that feels, what a relief. At last, the place of peace. The island amid the flood, the cool cave, the farther shore. The place where when you get to it, you think, I have arrived at last. I'm home. There's nowhere else I want to go. I've been looking for this all my lives. And yet, even our individual Dharma practices can degenerate, as we all know. They can get taken over by self-clinging all over again. We can fall back into the group consciousness obsession with status. What about me? Look at me. What have I attained? Have I attained more than what he's attained? It's a tragedy when that happens, but it's not the end of the world because we can help each other out. That's what Sangha practice is for. And the beauty of Sangha practice is that you can practice the Dharma in the way that takes you out of self-preoccupation because you're doing it for each other. That's what Subhuti was getting at when he says it's something whereby you're as concerned for others as you are for yourself. When I'm just trying to liberate myself, it can get taken over by selfing. You know, it's just one more way of self-preoccupation and selfishness. If I'm trying to liberate you and you're trying to liberate me, it solves that problem at a stroke. And that's the beauty of cooperative Dharma practice. I think that's why Bhante was keen, as the years went by, to encourage people to seek transcendence through cooperation together and do it as a Sangha thing rather than just as an individual thing. He was emphasizing bodhicitta more than stream entry, I would say. And that really came out in his seminar with Subhuti, the superpersonal force. And when you discover that, you somehow step out of the prison of self. And you discover that state of self-transcendence firsthand. And it feels so spacious. Then you know it, don't you? When it happens to you, you know it, you recognize it. And you know when Sangha practice is working, and you know when it's not working. But let's not give up on it. Let's keep on trying to find a way of doing it really effectively. So that's why we're all here on this event. And this is the quest. Not to attain the third order of consciousness and get somebody to give us a certificate for it, but to have that as our vision and our faith, and then practice until something amazing happens. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't, and who cares?